All right, well, good afternoon and evening, everyone. Welcome to our program today. I'm Sarah Maduri with Repatriate the Children USA, and I'm delighted to be hosting this evening's program with Beatrice Eriksson from Repatriate the Children Sweden and Natascha Ree Mikkelson from Repatriate the Children Denmark. Repatriate the Children is a children's rights organization existing to raise awareness of children being detained in Northeast Syria and to contribute to knowledge-based decision-making where humanitarian principles, rule of law, and global security are united. RTC operates with 3 autonomous national branches, Denmark, US, and Sweden, and has been an integral actor in the first instances of Western countries repatriating their citizens from the camps in Northeast Syria. RTC advocates for the children languishing in these camps, supports the families awaiting their return, and collaborates with the international community to bring these children home. It's my great privilege and delight to introduce you now to Beatrice Eriksson and Natascha Ree Mikkelson. Beatrice is a co-founder and spokesperson for Repatriate the Children and has a Master of Arts degree in theology from Uppsala University, with religion and peace and conflict as her main field of study. For the past 10 years, she has been working in social work and humanitarian issues in Sweden, Lebanon, and Iraq. In 2019, she worked with Patricio Galvez and Gorky Glosser Mueller on the repatriation process to Sweden for 7 orphan siblings from Al-Hol camp in Northeast Syria. She is the author of RTC's latest report and recommendations entitled "Waiting is Not an Option, a Call for Repatriation of Foreign Citizens in Northeast Syria." We also have with us today Natascha Ree Mikkelson. Natascha is the co-founder and spokesperson for RTC Denmark and holds a master's in psychology and communication. Natascha has worked as a journalist for many years with a focus on social issues, including extremism, crime prevention, radicalization, and the Islamic State and foreign fighters from Denmark. She has co-authored a book about the 2015 terror attack in Denmark. Natascha has traveled to Northeast Syria and Northern Iraq 6 times to visit the prison camps. So Natascha and Bea, we want to welcome you and thank you for your important contributions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Natascha, I'd love to start with you and your latest trip to the camps in Northeast Syria. You just came back last week, and I believe this was your 6th trip, correct?
Yes.
And I'd love to hear what was the difference about this trip and what continues to strike you as you make your visits to the camps.
Yeah, I just came back from Syria, and what was different about this visit was that it was clear from the imprisoned mothers and children that they had resigned. They had given up. Some were reacting with violence and others with complete apathy. In the past, I have visited both Al-Rosh and Al-Hol several times, and Al-Rosh was always the light of the camps. But over the last year, a large number of women and children have been transferred from Al-Hol to Al-Rosh, and the violence and higher crime rate has moved with them too. So Al-Rosh is now becoming a rougher and harsher place dominated by the more extreme newcomers. The most extreme and radical women have formed a moral police that controls the camp, exactly as it is in Al-Hol. So the women that I'm talking to, they're scared. And when we speak, I can hear that they are much more frightened and worried about their children's safety than they used to be. So it was really hard this time. And what strikes and frightens me most about the camps is what an awful place they are for children to grow up in. I simply don't understand that more is not done to make the repatriation happen much sooner to the children, so that they can get away from the inhumane conditions they are forced to grow up in. I mean, I will never get used to seeing all the misery, fear, and sorrow there.
Yeah, I can imagine. And when you were in the camps last week, there was an outbreak of violence, where some of which we've seen a little video footage of. Can you describe how it started and what was going on and what was running through your mind when you realized what was happening?
Yes. Yes, it was, Knut that I worked with and we were in the camp. And suddenly some women, they started rioting because of the conditions and because some of the other women were put in prison, we were told. And a group of soldiers, they came and we were asked to leave immediately. And once we had left the camp, there was burning of tents and shootings and mass rioting. and the US Army was sent in to control the situation. So the camp was shut down for several days after this, and no NGOs were allowed to carry on with their work inside the camp. All activities within the camp, such as schools and kindergartens, were suspended, and doctor clinics were closed, and so on. So there was a complete lockdown.
And we also got reports about the Swedish children, about how terrified they were, how they were asking their mothers if they would be shot to death, how they were crying themselves to sleep. I mean, it's just so unnecessary, all this suffering, because there's really no reason for them to remain there, with the escalating situation, with violence, fires, accidents, diseases. We're so worried that these events that children are being exposed to increases their stress and their trauma. And we know that the longer the children remain there, the more suffering they have to endure, and the harder also it will be for them to rehabilitate once they're back in their home countries.
Yeah, and in the report in September, waiting is not an option. I know, Bea, you go into great detail about that, which we'll get to in just a minute. But first, I want to ask about the most recent returns of citizens to Sweden and Denmark. How many Swedish or Danish citizens traveled to join ISIS, and how many have since returned, and how many remain in the camps? And Bea, let's start with you.
So from Sweden, some 300 people traveled to Syria and Iraq. I would be careful, though, to state that they all traveled to join ISIS, because the more we learn about the situation and those who traveled, and the more family members that we get to know, and the more information we get, we also understand that each and every one had their own motive or reason to travel, and had different levels of knowledge of what they were traveling to. And of course, this also depends on when they traveled. I mean, if it was back in the early days in 2012, for example, when the peaceful Arab Spring protest movement had been targeted by the Assad regime and militant groups, or if they traveled later, after 2014, when al-Baghdadi had declared the so-called caliphate and ISIS had committed the Yazidi genocide. But also there are reports about people being trafficked or forced to travel to Syria and Iraq. There was an interesting report coming out earlier this year from the legal human rights organization, Reprieve, where they have mapped all the British women who traveled, and they concluded that a majority of these women are to be considered as trafficking victims under UK law. Mm. And of course, there's reasons to believe this is not unique for British women only. So I think that since the debate is highly politicized, the depiction of these 300 people that travel from Sweden, for example, it's a bit simplistic and generalizing, especially with the women that the whole debate in Sweden right now evolves around. So what we see is a huge need for a more nuanced conversation about these travelers. But anyways, back to your original question. Among the Swedes that traveled, there are different groups. So before 2019, before the so-called end battles in Baghouz, already some 150 Swedes had returned to Sweden. That is half of the ones that traveled to Syria and Iraq. And most of them who had returned, they were men. Then we have the other group, which is the ones that died in the war during the years. And then we have the ones that still remains, the Swedes that are held in detention centers, in camps and in prisons still in Northeast Syria. Some of them were caught already before the end battles, or they had handed themselves over to the Kurd-led forces, which means that some Swedes are in their 5th year of this detention now, unlawful detention. So there's actually Swedish children who are born in these camps that have never stepped foot outside of them. And when it comes to repatriations, the first repatriation to Sweden, it occurred in May 2019, when one of the founders of Repatriate the Children, Patricio Galvez, he managed to bring his 7 orphaned grandchildren back to Sweden. And since then, since May 2019, up until just recently, the Swedish government have been so reluctant and passive in the repatriation issue. But then, almost after 2.5 years since the repatriation with the 7 orphans, we have just recently seen developments where some Swedish families have been brought home just the past months, actually. And I think we will get back to that a little bit later. So now, officially, there's 12 Swedish children and 7 women with links to Sweden remaining in the camps. But we believe, or we actually know, there's more Swedes than that. For example, we're very interested in a teenage boy in a detention center that I met with him when I was visiting Northeast Syria earlier this year. And this child, he told me that he misses his life in Sweden. He used to play soccer here, he used to go to school, and now his life has no meaning there, being detained. This boy is an orphan who is left behind, and he's not on any country's repatriation lists as far as we are concerned. And then also there is an unknown number of men in prisons. When it comes to Swedes, we don't know the number. Perhaps it's around 10 or something.
Wow, that's really good information. Natascha, I'd love to hear you, same questions about the Danish citizens. How many traveled? How many remain? And how many have since returned to Denmark?
Yes, so following Bia's description of the Swedish situation, we'll give you the Danish numbers, and I agree that it's very complex. It's not so who went there and who they fought with and all that, and why they went there, if they were trafficked and all that. According to the Danish intelligence service, estimated that at least 159 individuals traveled to Syria and Iraq from Denmark to join militant Islamic groups or other militant groups such as ISIS. Out of these, about 70 individuals are believed to have returned to Denmark. And we know that at least 5 women and 5 children who are entitled to Danish citizenship and 4 men are detained in Northeast Syria. And out of the adults, only 1 remains a Danish citizen. The other citizenships and permanent residence permissions have been revoked. And in addition, 40 people are estimated to have died in Syria and Iraq, and the rest are suspected to still be in the area. The latest returnees are the 14 children and their 3 mothers who were repatriated in October this year. And finally, we had 1 orphan baby and 1 severely injured 13-year-old that was repatriated to Denmark in 2019. But that was the boy that was without his mother and siblings. They just got back now here in October.
Okay. I'm going to ask in a moment about the reception that the returnees experience when they are returned back to Sweden or to Denmark. But first, Bea, I want to ask you, we know that the conditions in the camp are horrific, especially for children. And RTC's latest report, Waiting is Not an Option, reads at length about those dangers. For those in the audience who haven't read the report, what is the current situation and conditions within the camps?
In Rouge camp, this is the camp where most of the Swedes and Danes are detained. This is a tented camp in the desert of Northeast Syria, very close to the Iraqi Kurdistan border. This camp holds approximately 2,600 detainees, and most of them are children. And among the children, the majority are below the age of 7. And this is not a refugee camp. This is an open-air prison. The area is surrounded by barbed wire fencing. There's armed soldiers monitoring from watchtowers to discourage attempts at escape. What else? The weather conditions are so harsh. Either it's super hot in the summer or it's so cold in the winter, with few possibilities to protect the children from these extreme weather conditions. There's a lack of healthcare, lack of education, lack of child-friendly spaces. There's a lack of everything good and normal, basically. For the women, it's difficult to know who to trust. There's a lot of violence, accidents, fires, which has escalated recently. I think past months, or the past month, there has been at least 4 fires in Rosh camp. And this is, I mean, this is children's homes, these tents that are being demolished by fire. And it also creates a lot of agony and fear, especially for the children. But it's been a few months since I was there now. So Natascha, you have a more updated perception of the conditions.
Yeah, and as you just mentioned, there's a lack of access to food, so still like that, clean water, basic hygiene and medicine, and then no safety and security measures, and almost no possibilities to get medical or psychological treatment. And that's also, if you see several reports describe the conditions as torture-like and inhumane. So it's really awful. The majority of the inmates in the camps are children with very few people to look after them and also undertake their schooling and support their development. And I think it is important to clear out the misconception that Rosh and Al-Hol are refugee camps. They are not. I mean, they are prison camps, and the people who live there, the children too, they are prisoners who have not yet been tried or convicted of any crimes. So it's crazy. I mean, some of the Danish children have been there 3 years in these prison camps. And 2 of the kids that just got back here in October, they've been in prison with their mother for 4.5 years and the prison camps. So it's a long time for adults to be in prisons and prison camps without being convicted of anything, but for children also it's crazy, I think. And as I mentioned, the situation is worsening in Al-Rosh, but also in Al-Hol. The violence in the camps has escalated. We have seen a lot of killings this year in Al-Hol camp. As winter sets in, like you said, Bea, there are more and more accidents with ovens that tip over in the tents, causing fires across the camps, but also fires that have been put on or set on, how to say. And currently the temperature drops to far below 0 at night. So I don't know, to sum up, the camps are no places for children to grow up in. However, it's not fair or reasonable to expect the Kurds to take more responsibility. They have helped their coalition to defeat ISIS, and their own country is in ruins, and they are struggling to rebuild it with very little assistance from the international scene. So I think it's very important for countries like Denmark to repatriate their citizens.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds absolutely horrific and continues to be so. So I want to move now to the current Swedish and Danish positions on repatriation. What are they currently and how have they evolved? Natascha, let's start with you.
Yeah, I mean, the Danish government stance is that the Danes who travel to Syria and Iraq to join ISIS are national traitors. They have turned their back on Danish society. They have said that a lot, and democracy, and are not welcome back, and neither are their children. But after great pressure, Denmark decided in May this year to repatriate 14 children and their 3 mothers. And this happened just recently, and they were repatriated in the beginning of October. But as mentioned, I mean, the Danish government does not intend to repatriate the remaining 5 children who are entitled to Danish citizenship if they are accompanied by their mothers. So the government has only offered to bring home the 5 children if the mothers remain in the camps consequently. So it's separating the children from their mothers. So, I mean, who are their only primary caregivers. So we strongly oppose this approach. This opposition is also backed up by several experts on the topic that emphasize the many negative consequences on the children's well-being if they are taken away from their mothers. So there are still children left, but the 14 children and the 3 mothers just got back here in October.
Yeah, I'd also like to hear about the Swedish positions on repatriation, and have they evolved? Do you see them evolving? Tell us about that.
Since mid or late 2019, I would say, the Swedish policy have been that orphans shall be repatriated. When it comes to other children, those with parents, the policy have been that they should be repatriated, quote unquote, when and if it's possible. Regarding adults, the Swedish official policy has been that they should not be assisted to get any help to come home. And RTC strongly opposes these policies because we state that all citizens must be brought home, children, women, and men, because it's really not an option to leave our citizens in unlawful detention. Nothing good can come out of that. And it's also not a sustainable solution because these camps and prisons, they will not last forever. The Kurdish self-administration controlling or holding these prisoners, they are appealing for help. They don't want to keep children detained, and they also don't want to see a revival of a caliphate because it's confirmed that ISIS are kidnapping children from the camps, and only this year ISIS has claimed more than 1,200 attacks only in Syria and Iraq. Through a children's rights perspective, the Swedish policy is highly problematic, that they are making a difference between children, and that a child's family setting that the child happened to find themselves in, rather than their actual rights, would determine their destiny. That's dangerous for everyone in society to step away from rights and laws. And since the Kurd-led self-administration are unwilling to separate children from their mothers, with reference to the Convention on the Rights of the Child, and also since neither national nor international law would enable it, it has not been an option to separate kids from their mothers, and for Sweden to, for example, Sweden to bring home the children unaccompanied. So the only option really from the start, it has been to bring children and mothers home together, which the Swedish government for years refused to do. However, as I said, recently there has been big developments.
So with these countries' political positions in mind, what has led to the latest citizen returns? And can you give us any details about those latest returns? Natascha, let's start with you in Denmark.
In Denmark, I believe it was the pressure from the public and the media, politicians, and special interest organizations like RTC that played a tremendous role in the Danish government's decision to repatriate the 14 children and their mothers. And additionally, the Danish Prime Minister argued that the risk associated with leaving the children to grow up and potentially become radicalized were more severe than those of bringing them home for humanitarian reasons and for the rights, to be correct. But But about the latest repatriations, RTC Denmark was and is of the opinion that it was very important to let the mothers and children stay together upon their arrival for as long as possible. And if separation was necessary, then to let the children get used to the new situation and avoid any rough and unexpected actions by preparing the families about what will be happening. I mean, when we were visited we just got back now, but we also went to Syria in Northeast Syria in September. And when we visited some of the 14 children and their mothers in the camps, 10 days prior to their repatriation, they voiced significant worry about going to be separated immediately upon their return to Denmark. But unfortunately, this is exactly what happened. The separation happened right after their arrival and was very traumatizing for the children. The mothers have been their only, I think that's important to remember, that their mothers have been their only caregiver for many years, if not their entire life, in a war zone and in prison camps. So the mothers represent the only safety and security that the children have ever known. So therefore it was, we believed, very important that they were not separated upon arrival to ensure a good return, as many of the children have never met their Danish families before arriving in Denmark. So, but what happened is that the children, when they first came, they were separated, and only a few hours after arriving to Denmark in the middle of the night. And we were very frustrated because we were told that we and the relatives could be present when they arrived to where they were going to live. But the relatives of the children, and also Knud and I, who had met the children several times in the camps in Syria, we were told when they arrived that we could not be present after all. And we were standing there, next door to where they came with their mothers, but we were not allowed to be there. So they were leaving the children all by themselves when separated from their mothers. The police took them to prison straight on. That has been, we have been deeply critical of this approach to separation and the entire process upon arrival. It was something we have voiced clearly to all involved parts many times, and we had hoped that it would be possible for the children to join their mothers in a so-called imprisonment in surrogate for the first period after arriving to Denmark. So in order to let them at least get used to their new situation here. But that didn't happen that way.
And Bia, what about the latest citizen returns in Sweden? And same question to you, can you give us any details about those returns?
I think, just as in Denmark, the pressure got too high on the Swedish government to act. So in September this year, almost 2.5 years after the first repatriation, the one with the 7 orphans, which, by the way, is depicted in the documentary Children of the Enemy by the director Gorki Glaser-Müller, who is also a co-founder of RTC Sweden. So in September, a few months ago, Sweden brought home 6 children and 3 women. And then in October, they brought home 8 children and 3 women. And we are just thrilled at this development. It's long overdue, but it's truly the only right thing to do. And we are expecting the remaining 12 children and 7 women to be brought home within a nearby future also. But then efforts must be made to make sure that no children or Swedish citizens are being left behind. There must be efforts to identify the nationality of all children, because then also we know that we would find more Swedish children and families. Mm-hmm. However, in Sweden, the government is not actually talking in terms of repatriations. The official narrative here is that the self-administration are expelling these women, and then Sweden has to receive them. And then they choose to do so under controlled protocols by traveling to Northeast Syria, picking the families up and bringing them home, basically.
And Bia, what is the reception in the aftermath when these people come home to Sweden? Talk to us a little bit about that.
In Sweden, by the time that people traveled to Iraq and Syria, there were no laws against traveling there. There were also no laws actually against joining or being linked to a designated terrorist group. So as they now return, they will not automatically be prosecuted. And among the 150 that returned already before 2019, actually less than a handful has been convicted for crimes committed in Iraq and Syria. Most of them, once again, men. So with the women that are being brought home now, all of them, upon arrival, they're being given notice that they are under investigation for war crimes under international law. So that's ongoing, but they are not detained more than 1 or 2 days before they are released. There is a coordinated immediate reception when the families arrives at the airport. It's a governmental coordination among relevant authorities. And then this immediate reception is integrated into the ordinary system of healthcare, child protection, governmental aid, or education, or whatever is needed. And similar to what Natascha is saying, in all cases since 2019, the custody of the children have been removed from their mother. In most cases, children have been separated from their mothers and been put in institutions or foster care, at least for a while. This is also something that we opposes, because we think that there needs to be, obviously there needs to be investigations in Sweden whenever there's the smallest, slightest suspicion that the child is at risk. The Child Protection Unit as a social services needs to investigate if there's any danger for the child to be with its parents. And for these children being so vulnerable, coming back from these circumstances, of course, also these children need to be investigated. But we believe that this investigation should be done when the child is together with its mother.
Natascha, is that similar to the Danish process and reception once the Danish citizens return from Syria?
No, I mean, in Denmark, the situation is quite different. Here, all the adults, they are being prosecuted for joining a terror organization, and they are being put to prison as soon as they arrived here. So they are all, both the women that came back, the 3 women that came back recently, but also those that have come back earlier, they're all in prison now. But we were prepared for that when they arrived to Denmark, and therefore we wrote also, I mean, we spent a lot of time trying to make sure that the children would not suffer for that, the mothers would be put to prison as soon as upon their arrival. And we wrote a hearing statement and several other similar documents as soon as we were informed that the children would be repatriated, in an effort to ensure that the children would be able to return home under the best possible conditions. And we have strongly recommended imprisonment in surrogate, so they could have stayed together with their mothers when they first arrived. But it has been very difficult. We have had a very good cooperation with especially the social authorities and the relevant local communities. But we have experienced a lack of cooperation with especially the police because of the criminal charges against the mothers. So, I mean, that has been a very different situation. Yeah, so right now it is, I mean, the families that came back in October, in the case of 2 of the families, the children have been allowed to visit their mothers in prison once a week. And in the case of the last family, the children have been allowed to visit their mother twice a week and speak on the phone 2 times a week. But for the children, we have seen 7 of the children quite regularly since they came back to Denmark. And for them, it has been very hard. I mean, their fathers are, one is dead and one is in prison in Northeast Syria, so they already lost their fathers, and now their mothers are in prison, and they have very little contact with them, and they're traumatized from being in the camps for so long and also being in a war zone. So it's been really hard for them that their mothers suddenly disappeared in their life. They were not next to them.
Yeah, I can imagine. What you just answered a lot of this, Natascha, but I'm going to ask this question anyways. Is there anything in particular that's worked well that you think is really working well and can be built upon? And is there anything in particular that really needs to be improved? And I know you just answered some of that in your last comment, but I'd love to put that question to you.
Yes, I think that some aspects of the reception work very well, whereas others could have been, like I just said, executed much better. I think what worked well was the cooperation with the local communities and the National Board of Health and Welfare, and also the social work regarding the children's return to Denmark. That has also been very constructive. I mean, the authorities invited, which was good, I mean, with the relatives here in Denmark before they repatriated the children and the mothers. They invited us to numerous meetings to discuss what will happen to them after they will get home, and also now after they have got home, we still have meetings with them and where they're listening to the input and knowledge on this matter that we have and the relatives have. So that has been very good, and I think they have ensured that the children receive special and individual good treatment from psychologists and others. But I think a lot of what went wrong was especially, I mean, I think because several politicians made extremely harsh statement demanding the removal of the children from their mothers, and that influenced the public opinion also in a very negative direction. And in the legal actions towards the mothers and later during their imprisonment, there has been shown like no empathy or flexibility in order to make the children suffer the least possible. So I think that has been very difficult.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you the same question. When you're thinking about the reception of returnees, what has worked well and what needs to be improved?
There's a lot of things that have worked well, and that links into the normal, the ordinary system in Sweden. We have a welfare system that works well here. But so the governmental coordinated reception, the immediate reception, it has been working well. However, authorities can only do what authorities can do, you know. So we think that the government should consider and also like actively acquire knowledge from civil society organizations, including religious communities, to have a cooperation to find holistic solutions regarding the reception, rehabilitation, and reintegration strategies. There is also a lot of things that could be improved, of course. And what's the most important, of course, the child perspective. There's a lack of child perspective in the whole management of this issue and also in the reception. I think also there's a low understanding of existential and theological guidance for those who are in need of that. That doesn't apply to everyone, but for some it does. With the children, I mean, as they have lived under very difficult conditions in these prison camps, when returning to Sweden, it is of the utmost importance that these children get a stable life situation linked to what can bring them safety, both short-term and long-term. And if the child would be at risk with its mother, of course the child needs to be protected. That's a given. But that children by default are being separated from their mothers on arrival in Sweden, and for some of them being here months and still not have been reunited or even met their mother. This is very difficult to understand from a children's rights perspective, potentially harmful and for the child, and also against research on attachment theories and rehabilitation on trauma. After we were part of the repatriation process with the 7 orphans in 2019, we concluded what had worked well and what could have been improved in relations to relevant authorities, recommending then that having an inclusive process, first of all, as I said, for children and mothers to be placed together during the investigation of the child, because that's the only way to see the children's needs and the mother's ability to meet the needs. How else would that be investigated if no social workers or experts would see them together? But also other family members, I mean, extended family members, such as children's grandparents, aunts, uncles. We believe they also should be integrated into the reception and the children's life from an initial point, to empower the children's sense of coherence, their identity, and to start to build a pro-social network around the children that will last long term. Because as for now, most of the children have not been allowed to meet with anyone from their extended family. So yeah, with extended family members that have been for very many years struggling to get their children and grandchildren home, they are not being given almost any information. They are completely excluded in the reception. And we believe that's a mistake and a decision that is not in the best interest of the child. Once again, unless the family would actually be harmful for the children. But that goes without saying. So then we believe there needs to be individual assessments and decision made in the best interest of each child.
Yeah, thank you for that. That was very informative. And I know we want to take audience questions in just a minute, but I have one more question for you, Bea and Natascha. What is necessary to galvanize or convince governments to repatriate the rest of their citizens? Bea, do you want to start us off?
We talked about it a little bit already. It's putting pressure on decision makers, because political will is what is needed. These families are not held by ISIS, the enemies. They are held by our closest allies in the fight against ISIS. Allies that are appealing to us to come and get our citizens. And I believe that resourceful countries, such as the Scandinavian ones and Europeans or whatever, that have started to repatriate their citizens, these countries also must contribute to finding solutions for other families, families of other citizenships that are being left behind, because most of the children in these camps, we're talking about 12 children here, or like, this is a small number, but there's tens of thousands of children in these camps, and most of them don't have governments that will care for them. So I believe that the end goal must be to empty and close these camps and prisons also in the nearby future. As I said before, it's not a sustainable solution for anyone. And yeah, the living conditions, these camps are a humanitarian catastrophe. And through a security perspective, it's dangerous potentially to let kids grow up in this toxic environment.
Natascha, do you have any comments to add to that?
Yeah, I don't know. I think I agree with Bea, and I think it's a very difficult question to answer, because the governments across the globe are already aware of just how horrible the conditions in the camps are, and this humanitarian disaster should really be more than enough to get them going, but they still choose to not only remain passive, but to complicate and delay the repatriation, which is terrible. Bea said, there's thousands and thousands of children still being in these camps also, when hopefully sometimes in the nearest future that all the Danish and Swedish children are repatriated. I mean, there will still be a big job to do to get all these children out of these camps. And I mean, for the Danish government here in Denmark, they have tightened and rewritten the laws with the specific goal of excluding these women and children and men from re-entering the Danish society. So, I mean, for us, it's very important that we will continue with doing lawsuits and putting a constant pressure on decision makers, as long as it will require to bring home all the Danish children. It's really sad. And also, we will also continue to try and help the other children that are there, and to follow the children that comes back home, so they can adjust to Danish society and not be, repelled or being. I mean, it's very difficult because of the situation here. So we will do everything in our power to ensure that they will receive the best possible treatment here in Denmark. So,
yeah, absolutely. Well, Natascha and Bea, thank you both for all of your insight and important information. Let's open it now for audience questions. If anyone has a question, please raise your hand or drop it into the chat box, and we'll allow plenty of time for any questions from the audience.
I think there's a raised hand from Jasmine.
Yeah, is it okay if I ask the question?
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, okay. Well, first of all, thank you so much for hosting this very important webinar. It's been heartbreaking. My name is Yasmin Posio, and I represent the Left Party in the Swedish Parliament. And we have been claiming that these children should be repatriated sorry, immediately when we heard about the situation. Unfortunately, the other parties were opposing this, and they were claiming that the mothers were soldiers and so on, and terrorists. And we still claim that these children cannot help who their parents are, and they need to be taken home to Sweden. Unfortunately, it took way too long before the government started acting. But at least they're taking the children home now, finally. But what do you want me to do as a parliamentarian in the parliament forward on? So thank you.
Thank you, Jasmine, and thank you for all of the efforts that you, Håkan Svenneling, and the other parliamentarians in Vänsterpartiet has done for these families. What is happening now is that the ones that are on the Ministry of Foreign Affairs lists are being brought home, and we're so happy about that. However, that's not enough because we know there's more Swedish children, and when we are asking the Swedish Ministry of Foreign Affairs about this, they're just saying that, well, we're not looking for missing people abroad, so we're just working on the ones that the Kurds are giving us on lists. And I try to explain, like, yeah, but I met with the decision makers of the self-administration, and they told us that it's impossible for them to identify all of them, and it's very messy in these camps. And then we get the response that, well, we don't think there is any more Swedes there. And then I say, well, when I talk to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and then I say, well, at least 5 different cases has come to our knowledge as a civil society actor only since May this year. 5 different cases of Swedish citizens, most of them children, that has not been on your list, that you did not visit on your consular travels there. So that's one indicator. Unfortunately, we need more allies to push for more. We have to make sure that no Swedish kids are left behind. So it's not enough only with these ones on the list. So that's one thing. Another thing is to be part of pushing other governments and colleagues in other countries to do the same, because it's not over until the camps are emptied and all children have life opportunities elsewhere. Thank you so much for your commitment, Jasmine.
Looks like we have another question from Rowan. Do we know the criteria of repatriating mothers? Why some mothers are accepted and others not? So I'd actually love, Bea, for both you and Natascha to answer that question, because I'm sure it's different depending on the country.
Yes, so with the official Swedish narrative, the Swedish government is saying that they are not repatriating anyone, right? So the official version is that the Kurds are investigating these women, and as they are not being able to find any evidence against them, they are expelled. However, we know that there's no possibilities for local justice with foreign citizens in Northeast Syria, so it's all a bit interesting to follow. Yeah, I don't know what else to say about that. Natascha?
Sorry. Yeah, in Denmark, they have repatriated the women with Danish citizenship, and but not the men. And then the women that are in the camps now and their children, they have stripped off their citizenship or their permanent residentship, and they don't want to repatriate them. They have made a new law in 2019 while they were still while they were in the camps, these women, and the men were in prison, and then stripped off our minister have stripped off their citizenship administratively, but their children, because they were born before they stripped off their citizenship, they are still Danish. So, I mean, they have said that they will bring back the children if the mothers will let them go without them. But of course, like Bea also said, the Kurdish authorities will not allow that, and also it can be, you know, a violence against the human rights, the children's rights. So to separate them from the mothers. So this is not a possibility. So, but the reason why the others are not being repatriated is that they are no longer Danish citizens.
Any other questions from the audience? Feel free to drop in the chat or raise a hand, or looks like Ansar has a question. Have you met women and children from Trinidad and Tobago, West Indies? I have 3 grandchildren over there.
Yeah, I actually met one boy when I was here a week ago in a Hoodie Center. I think he was 17 years old or something. Yeah, so I talked to him, and he was, of course, really sad. He was there, and yeah, didn't know what will happen to him.
Yeah, and I'm really sorry, Ansar, to hear about your family situation. I can only imagine what you have been going through for many years and still going through. If you're not already aware, there is an advocacy group also in Trinidad and Tobago working to advocate to bring citizens home. Perhaps you're part of it, I don't know, but if you're not and you want more information, then just reach out to Natascha or me afterwards and we'll connect you.
Yes, definitely.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, because my heart is heavy with my grandchildren. I also have a daughter-in-law and a daughter there too also, and my daughter has been beaten up very badly by what she said authorities across there, and that is the situation now, and the local lawyers in Trinidad here are asking us for as much as 50,000 Trinidad and Tobago dollars for each person that they try to process. I do not have that money. So, you know, that's 500, that's $500,000 of my dollars. And I do not have that money that I could even possibly begin to set that thing. The government of Trinidad and Tobago has not said that they would not allow the people to come back, but they have not actually pushed for the repatriation. I am sad for the people in Sweden and things who have said that out. They have made their citizens of they have stripped citizenship from them, but our government has not done that. But they have not, at the same time, they have not pushed, because three people were sentenced in Iraq for 20 years from Trinidad for being in Iraq, and but the judge in passing sentence said that if the government of where they came from, in this case Trinidad, were willing to take them, then they could come to Trinidad and finish off their sentence. But you know, it's just a nice way of saying, well, we're willing to give you back the children, give you back the people, because you know there's no law that they have broken in Trinidad. So when they come back to Trinidad, they'll be just free. But those are some of the challenges that we face in Trinidad. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that. It's devastating to hear, and really, really sorry that you have to go through all this. I hope for a solution also with the Trinidad and Tobago government as soon as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Looks like we have a couple more questions. Another one from Rowan. Maybe it's not politically correct to ask, but do people of color have less chance of getting repatriated? That's actually a great question. Do you have, Natascha or Bea, have either of you seen any type of exclusion for any reason? That's a really good question.
I think in Denmark,
yeah, Natascha.
I think, I mean, for sure there has been some kind of racism, both against Islam, the religion, in this, you know, that they are not, they are talking about this as everyone is the same, and you know, if you're a Muslim, you're extremist, and they don't look at the differences of why they went there, and if they have changed while they were there, and also that of course Islam is a big religion and has nothing to do with fundamentalism, but also I would say with ethnicity. I mean, in here with some of the cases we worked on, it's I would say crazy. I mean, these women and men, they are born in Denmark, they have lived here all their life, their parents, their sisters and brothers, everyone lives in Denmark. This is their country. And now when they have made this law that you can strip up the Danish citizenship, only, you could say somehow, only because their parents are original from somewhere else. I mean, I think that is an unfair way to treat people and to treat the Danish citizens. I see them as Danish citizens. So, and of course with their children, it have, it's an extremely high price also for them. So yeah.
Yeah, any other comments on that?
I agree with Natascha, and I just think that if the situation would have been completely different, and if this war has not been in the Middle East, and if the religion that has been manipulated and politicized and used as a tool for warlords has not been Islam, I think the whole situation would have been much different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So I notice we are just over time. Pia, I see there's a question from you. I just direct messaged you. If you'll send me your email address, I'm happy to follow up with you individually since your question's about the US. Thank you all for attending today's session. Everyone in the audience can find our latest report, Waiting is Not an Option, online at repatriatethechildren.org and also on our Facebook and Twitter feeds. You can also learn more about RTC's work through any of those channels. If you have any additional questions, you can contact us by emailing info@repatriatethechildren.org. That's info@repatriatethechildren.org, or find us on social media. Bea and Natascha, I want to give you one last chance. Any last closing thoughts from either of you?
I just want to say that governments can contribute to prevent more children becoming victims of war. And governments can and must also contribute to peace and reconciliation and to prevent further atrocities in the name of violent extremism. There's so many victims in this war, and they must be offered support, protection, redress. There's still thousands of Yazidis missing from the genocide and the war. And I believe since human rights, peace and security is interlinked, the atrocities that's carried out by ISIS, they need to be countered, not only by military actions, but also by humanitarian interventions.
Natascha, any last words from you?
Yeah, I think I would like to add that, I mean, just as great it is that 14 children here from Denmark have been repatriated, just as difficult it is for us to understand that 5 children have been left behind. And also, like Bea says, all the thousands and thousands of other children that governments like Denmark doesn't do more to help this situation. And I mean, these 5 children, Danish medical specialists have seen them, and they all agree that the children's health situation is great, both physically and mentally. And they have strongly recommended that these children are brought home to Denmark for relevant treatment. And they have emphasized several times that they should, under no circumstance, be separated from their mothers, as they are key to the children's healing process. So, I mean, it's just, it's so difficult to understand that they will leave them there, these children. We just met 3 of them when we were there now, and they're so skinny, and they are traumatized, and also with everything that happens now in Al Rosh camp. So it's, yeah, it's devastating. And I'm really scared that if they don't bring them home with their mothers immediately, with their families, something bad would happen with these children, because they cannot survive in these camps for years and years, and neither can all the other children that are there. So I just hope that something will happen soon.
Yeah, those are important and sobering last thoughts. So appreciate your contribution, Natascha and Bea, and everyone who had questions and participated in the session today. We thank you very much. Thank you for joining, and stay safe and stay well.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.